The child's soul is going to do something with what you put in it. And for that reason, you need to give it the best. The Philippians 4, 6, and 7, best. And that means really great literature. That means don't give them bad literature because you got it at a Christian bookstore, right? It means give them beautiful, great literature that will feed their soul and give them something to really worth thinking about. And then as much as possible, have them memorize, have them remember things, but don't reduce the memory to this computer, right? This is another horrible analogy that our age uses, that the child is like a computer. He's not like a computer. Well, let me rephrase that. He is like a computer a very little bit, but he's a living soul. And so you put something into a computer, it will never nourish that computer. The computer doesn't depend on it. The child does depend on what you put into his soul. So memory is just absolutely crucial and depends on attention. The other thing that our age, because of its lack of self-awareness, scoffs at, diminishes the value of is imitation. And I would suggest to you here, there's a number of different ways I could go here and really enjoy all of them.
Feel free to go all the different ways.
Thanks. The first thing I would point out is that we are an image. We are an image of somebody else, right? We are made to be an image. An image is an imitation. Okay, so we are, by creation and by design, an imitation of somebody else, meant to be like somebody else. And one of the profound points about that is psychological. If we are supposed to be like somebody else, we will never be happy until we are. And therefore, the human soul is always trying to be like somebody else. If I'm a basketball player, I'm not trying to be like me for the rest of my life. I'm trying to be like the great ones, or somebody better than me at least, right? If I'm a singer, I want to be Caruso. If I'm a writer, I want to be Shakespeare. Now, at a certain point you realize I'm not going to be, so then you adjust, but you still want to be like, and you strive to be like people who are better than you. But ultimately, there is no likeness that we'll ever be satisfied with until we're like the one we were made to be like. But because our age doesn't believe he's there to be like, and because our age diminishes the value of imitation, we talk about things like peer pressure. We don't have a way, instead of saying, okay, I want to be like somebody else, I'm going to engage this wisely, we say, oh no, I'm going to be an original. I'm going to be creative. I'm going to be me, which means nothing. It doesn't mean anything at all. You're not an isolated individual with no connection. Even God has never been alone, right? He's a Holy Trinity. So Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are eternal. There's never been a time when he was not, when the Son was not. And if the Son was, the Father was. And the Spirit has always been there. The love of the Father for the Son is the Holy Spirit, and the love of the Son for the Father. He's always been a communion, right? He's always been in communion. And so if we think, oh yeah, I'm going to rise up by myself and I'm going to create myself, it's a farce on the face of it. As soon as the words come out, you realize they don't mean anything. But the trouble is, our culture does try for that. And as a result, they imitate at the lowest levels, right? They imitate outward appearances. They imitate gestures. They imitate accents. For those, by the way, for people who think I'm exaggerating the significance of imitation and that, you ought to be more creative and less imitative, I would say to you, then why do you speak the language you speak? Make up your own language. Go create your own. Tolkien did that. Why can't you? Right? It's because we're created to live in communion, right? Because we're in the image of a communion, of a God who is communion. And so we are created to live in communion with others and to strive to be like the best. And if we don't deliberately choose to be like the best, then we will be like other than the best. And this is another reason why it's so important. This is at the heart of classical education, that you take the best and put it in front of your children. You don't say, oh, just as long as he reads. Now, you can do serious damage to your soul by reading bad things. If you're reading low-level material, you'll never learn how to read well any more than if a fourth grader is wanting to become an NBA player, but only plays with fourth graders for the rest of his life. He'll ever become good, right? You have to play with the best to be the best. And so it's the same with our minds. We just sort of, oh, what if my child finds Shakespeare difficult? What if my child doesn't understand Shakespeare? Well, I'm 53 years old. Okay, I graduated with a degree in liberal arts, studied Shakespeare while I was in college. I still don't understand Shakespeare. So what? It's beautiful, right? Do you understand Mozart? Nobody needs to understand Mozart. It's beautiful, right? So just listen to the music. And I do believe that understanding is vastly overrated. What's more important is, what is my child imitating and what am I imitating? And of course, this is true in the spiritual life especially. But if we move from the spiritual into the intellectual life, and by intellectual, I don't mean academic, I just mean the life of the mind. Okay, if we're going to look at the life of the mind, whose thinking are you imitating? Whose language are you imitating? Whose artistry are you imitating? Whose lifestyles are you imitating? You know, all of these things. You can't avoid the fact that we're made to imitate, right? And so we have to imitate wisely. We have to imitate the best at each thing that we do. This is why, when it comes to language use, the classical educators said way back in ancient Rome already, I think Plato even said this, that when you teach a child language, the first thing is not grammar. The first thing is not a formal grammar. The first thing is make sure that whoever's talking to your 2 or 3-year-old speaks perfectly. You know, you want the Queen's English, okay? Because now some people say, oh, what a snob. Well, fine, but here's the thing. The Queen's English is very precise and very difficult. I can't do it. People who are listening can tell I can't do it. But if you can speak the Queen's English, it's easy to come down, right? In other words, if you can speak a very refined form of a language, and if you understand how it works and get the dynamic of it, it's easy to come down to the level of slang. And that means that you can think at a high level with language, and then you can lower the level of your thought, right? That's easy. But if you only learn slang, and then you want to climb up to a higher level of language, you can't. You can't do it. You'd have to go through a course. You'd need somebody to coach you up to it. You know, you'd have to live out the My Fair Lady kind of experience, which, I mean, if you can do it, go for it. And I don't think it's snobbery, because I think that the scriptures tell us that God speaks, right? Well, why does God speak? He speaks to create, and he speaks to communicate. He speaks to bless, right? And if God speaks, then language is important. And to allow language to just be sloppy, to imitate, just to allow language to decline. There's a reason why Nietzsche said, we will not be rid of God until we are rid of grammar. So the 3 basic skills that we have to be teaching then are first, attention, how to pay attention, and how to do it for a long time. Remembering that paying attention doesn't mean being manipulated to attend to, to hyperstimulate the senses so you can't escape. That's not paying attention. Attention means to stretch towards something, and it involves the will. And then there's memory and there's imitation. And if you can teach children how and what to imitate, and how and what to memorize, and to pay attention, which is what imitation and memory depend on, then you're on your way. You're doing what is most important for your child, especially if you're focused on the true, the good, and the beautiful. But there's a 4th skill too, and it's so interesting because these are skills that, all 4 of these are skills that you just kind of skim off the surface, right? Everybody knows people have to pay attention. In fact, everybody knows so well that people have to pay attention that they think it's just automatic. You either do or you don't. No, you can cultivate it. You need to. Same with imitation. We don't like that. We don't think it's automatic, but that's because we poked our own eyes out. I mean, obviously, we're always imitating, right? And so we can cultivate wise imitation. With memory, we're always remembering things. Even if we're terrible at school, kids who are horrible students at school can remember everything there is to know about something they really like, which is interesting right there, right? So memory is something we're always doing, and it's one of the most fascinating things that happens in our minds. But there's something else we're always doing too, that also I believe is on the surface of thought, but it's so obvious that we miss it almost completely, in a way. But then if you listen for this now, after I say this, start listening in the way people talk about almost anything, but watch for this and see if you find it. And that is simply that we're always trying to harmonize. Okay, we're always trying to resolve discords. We're always trying to see how things fit together. We're always trying to get things into a right relationship with each other. Now, as Christians, we celebrate this desire of the soul to bring harmony because we believe in Christ, who is the Logos. And the Greek word logos is a magnificent word. It does mean word, like it says in the Bible. In the beginning was the word. But even in English, word means a whole lot more than, a set of letters on a page. A preacher can say, for example, I have a word for you. And then he doesn't follow with the, right? He follows with a whole sermon. He's got a word. He's got a message, right? Well, the Greek concept of a logos ultimately means the unifying principle of everything. Okay, so immediately a logos can be an idea, right? If I'm thinking to myself 3 + 2 = 5, in Greek you could say that's a logos. That idea that 3 + 2 = 5 is a logos. Now, if I hold, in math we do manipulatives, right? If I show you 3 pieces of Lego and add 2 pieces of Lego and you see 3 + 2 = 5, now you've got it concrete. Now you have an incarnation of that logos, right? You see? And so what happens then is the mind sees the idea when it's properly incarnated and when it's attended to, okay? What the mind just did is achieved a harmony. But if I say to you something like 3 + 2 = 6, okay, if you're healthy, that bothers you, right? You feel stress even. You feel discord. And so now if I say 3 + 2 = 6 - 1, okay, now some people feel so much relief they laugh when I say that, right? And that's the goal of math, is to tell jokes with numbers, okay? Because you're creating a discord, but the soul needs harmony. And so as you sort of hold out the discord, the person feels stress, but then you show them, you bring the reconciliation and they go, oh, that's right. Even reconciliation is a harmonizing, right? So when we like music, okay, even, in fact, the problem with popular music is not that it stays in the realm of discord, it's that it cuts the discord short so fast, right? So you got 3 or 4 minutes, and in a pop song, at least I don't know anymore, but when I listened to pop music, you'd have a discord that would last for about 30 seconds and then a resolution in the chorus. Then there'd be another 30 seconds of discord, resolution. That's just sentimental music, right? That's not very good. But if you listen to really great Baroque or classical or, this really symphonic music, or if you listen to even an opera, or if you listen to, you don't have to get into the sort of highbrow music, jazz frequently. What these kinds of music, blues, what these musics will do is they'll extend the discord for a really long period of time, right? And if you can't handle it, if you can't stay in that discord, you get frustrated, and I hope you'll stick it out, because if you don't, you'll be very unhappy if you stay in there. But eventually the song reaches a resolution. It reaches a point of harmony. Now, what's going on in music and what's going on in math is so pleasing to us, because the reason we think in the first place, I don't want to say every time because then they wouldn't think in heaven, but the reason we think in the first place, it seems to me, is because we're trying to find harmonies. And so every problem we've got is some kind of discord. It might be a social discord, right? I could conceivably, it's unimaginable, but I could conceivably have a disagreement with my wife. Okay, so then we have to talk about it. Well, what we are now is we're in that stage in a math problem where I haven't got it worked out, and it's very tense and it's very stressful. And that problem of not having it worked out, you just have to endure that sometimes. Because if you hasten it, you won't solve the math problem. The same can be true in music, and the same can be true socially. So in our soul, we have this craving for harmony, because Christ the Logos is the principle of harmony for all things. And that brings me kind of back where I started to go on the idea of a logos, right? A logos, ultimately, in every particular logos, you have an idea that harmonizes some experience, right? Or you could have a domain of learning, biology, right? That logi part is from logos. So what it literally means is not the study of life. Bios is life, logos is, we often hear study. It's practically, that's true, that's what it means. But what it literally means is that which is ordered by life. Okay, that in which the ordering principle is life. Okay, so you can have biologos, and that's all living things being organized, harmonized. Okay, zoology then is used to apply the logos' animal life. Zoe has become, in the sciences, it means animal life. So zoology is specifically governed by the principle of unity of animal life. Okay, so any logi that you see is a logi because there's some principle, some logos, that's the sun of that solar system, you see. Okay, so then the question becomes, there's biology, there's zoology, there's physiology, there's hamartiology, there's, what's the logos of all logoi? Okay, that's what Jesus is, that's what John is referring to, that Jesus is. He's the logos of everything. He's the son of the entire solar system. He's whatever the whole cosmos revolves around, that's him, right? If there's only a solar system, he's the sun. And everything is in its place because of it. Now, Jupiter has a bunch of moons, so that you could say is a Jupiterology, right? But the solar system is a solology. Well, the whole thing, everything, is a Christology, is a logos. And so he's the principle of unity for everything. Now, this is really practical. It doesn't sound like it maybe at first. First thing it does is it opens us up to worship, right? Because Christ really is the logos. But the second thing is, people don't realize sometimes, I think, how frustrating it is to despair. Now, if you talk to kids, and more, younger and younger, you can get into a discussion with kids, and it doesn't take long for them to get to the point where they'll say, that's true for you. Okay, well, what does that mean, that's true for you? What that means is, happily, they don't think about it, so they don't usually know what it means. But when adults say it, if they've thought it through, what they mean by that is there isn't really any truth. There isn't any knowable truth, right? There isn't anything that makes sense of this universe. There isn't a logos. Now, once you conclude that, which our culture has, it's decided there isn't a logos, there isn't any way to make sense of everything, then how do you think and why would you think? Well, the answer is for practical reasons, right? So you'll think in order to get power over people, you'll think in order to succeed in your job or in your career, you'll think for all kinds of low level, because frankly, those are low level reasons to think, especially getting power over other people, sometimes just to survive. That we'll think practically, but we won't think truthfully. We won't think in order to find truth because we don't believe it's knowable. And if we do believe it's knowable, we don't believe that ultimately it's all explained by something. Well, Christ is the explanation, the principle of everything. And so if we believe in him, okay, this is why historically Christians have never been ashamed of the intellectual life. It doesn't mean every Christian needs to become an intellectual, but this Christian fear of the intellect is a 20th century phenomenon. Historically, it's very weird. Christians who are afraid to think, I'm gonna overstate this, so if I offend you, don't be too offended by this. I'm overstating here. But a Christian who's afraid to think is afraid to think because he doesn't believe in Jesus. Okay, in the sense that he doesn't believe that ultimately everything will be explained, that everything can be explained by Christ the Logos. And so what he does is he says, well, I can't deal with all that. Now, I understand we're limited in time. None of us are smart enough to figure it all out. But when you believe that ultimately everything makes sense, okay, you're not afraid to think. Okay, when you believe that ultimately things don't make sense, you don't have any real reason to think except, as I said before, pragmatic, powerful reasons. And it's no accident that the modern dominant American philosophy, the one that gave us progressive education, is called pragmatism, capital P, pragmatism. I have nothing against practicality, but I have something seriously against pragmatism, which is to say, you measure the value, you measure the truth of something by what you can do with it, by what use can be made of it. Another term for it is utilitarianism. Well, we have Christ the Logos. And to stop thinking about something is to be unwilling to endure the discord because we don't believe that in the end that final note's going to be played that's going to make this whole symphony come back together. Christ is the note in which he's the key in which the whole cosmos sings. The angels sing in the key of Christ, right? And we should too. And when we aren't willing to think, for whatever reason, when we aren't willing to think according to our capacity, which for none of us is very great, but if we're not willing to think according to our capacity, then we have to consider the possibility that it's because we don't believe that Jesus is the truth, which he claimed to be, the way, the truth, and the life. So you use the senses to pay attention. You also use the imagination and thinking and so on and the will to pay attention, and that's what needs to be cultivated. Secondly, practically the imitation and the memory. You need to find ways to put things in front of them, but always with an eye to harmonizing. You see, if the goal, the natural God-given goal of human thought is to achieve harmony, if you hold out the possibility of harmonizing something, then the mind is aroused to seek it. But if what you learn is a technique that is an end in itself, that's boring, frankly. And so often in math, and so often in science, and so often in literature, instead of giving them the hope that they'll be able to gain an insight into something, which is what a harmony is, the hope that they'll be able to see how something relates to other things and how it relates within its own parts, which is another manifestation of harmony. So often we just teach them steps. We teach them techniques. We teach them activities, and we can't figure out why they're not excited by it. And the fact is, it's because it's boring. That's why. But harmony is always satisfying to the soul. When some of the buzzwords you'll hear are things like the aha moment, or an insight, or what's the old Greek word? Eureka. Yes, you'll hear someone say eureka, which means I found it, right? What he found in that particular case was the solution to a problem. How much gold does gold displace water? And he figured it out, taking a bath, ran through the streets naked, screaming, "Eureka, I found it, I found it." But what does I found it really mean? It means that there was a discord here. There was something I didn't see, and now I see it, right? And we can give our kids practice in being blind and then seeing every single day, right? Every single day there can be something, but only if we're willing to teach them how to wrestle with things. And I think the most important thing, and I'll end with this on the harmonizing part, the most important thing about teaching math, for example, the most important thing about teaching all these different things toward harmony, but especially, I'm going to say teaching math, is not so that they'll grow up to be able to design bridges. It's because in life there are problems. There are discords that we feel in our soul. And if we don't learn how to persist in that discord until we hit the solution, until we find the joy, then we become depressed, we become unhappy, we give up, we limit our capacity for truth perception. We run the risk, frankly, of mental disorders. Notice the word disorder, right? What does that mean? There's a disorder, there's a disharmony. The real reason, in my opinion, for teaching math is so that children get practice every single day resolving discords at higher and higher levels. And you can't do that without going through the stress. You can't do that without having to confront your ignorance, just like life. That's the real reason for studying math. So we need to orient our instruction toward harmony because Christ is the principle of all harmony. And if we do that, then imitating and memorizing and paying attention will be energized. They will not just be a hook through the nose forcing kids to do things for tests, but they will be energized and directed towards something truly satisfying to the soul. And it's satisfying because God made it that way. God made the soul to hunger for harmony, and he made himself as the solution. So every single time the soul harmonizes anything, they experience the delight, ultimately the delight of knowing God, of enjoying God's goodness.
The Greek word that's behind that idea is skole. So skole roughly meant leisurely learning or undistracted time to study the things that are most worthwhile.
The first time I heard the concept of teaching from rest was, I was listening to Andrew Kern, actually. He was giving this interview. I was cleaning out my 8-year-old son's closet. and I was pregnant with the twins. So pregnant with my 5th and 6th kids. I'm cleaning the closet. I'm kind of in this state of despair. And I hear him tell the interviewer that the number one thing a homeschooling mom should do is teach from a state of rest.
The thing I want to say about rest is that that's what the Lord has called us to. And if you believe that you should be homeschooling your children, then you need to ask yourself a basic question. Do you believe that because you're afraid of something, or do you believe that because you're called to it?
I thought, this man has no idea what he's talking about, clearly. But it piqued my interest enough. I thought, this is so hard. This homeschooling thing, I'm so worried I'm gonna ruin something. I'm worried I'm not giving my kids every opportunity they could have, that if they're just relying on me for most of their education, there's got to be something wrong with this situation. I don't feel like I'm enough.
Our Lord has said to us very clearly, if you're weary and you're heavy laden, come unto me, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. And then he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
And it was in the process of reading about rest and what it actually means to shed the anxiety and take on this work of homeschooling and raising my kids without all this angst and worry that really drove me just to find out as much as I could about it. And as I was learning about rest and what that means and what that could look like in the life of a homeschooling family, that's when I wrote the book.
I've been talking about this for a long time, for about 7 or 8 years after reading Pieper's book. Sarah started doing it.
He didn't expect the disciples to feed the 5,000. He said, bring me what you have. And they brought him this basket of loaves and fish, and he turned it into enough for the multitude.
She heard these talks from Andrew Kern and myself, and then she started to think, how could I actually do this? She began to write about it. She began to reflect on it. She began to make some changes slowly in her own homeschool. And then she was blogging about it. People were responding and saying, she touched a chord.
Teaching from rest for me looks like me bringing my basket, just the little bit that I have, and letting him turn it into something more beautiful than I could on my own.